Well, welcome. My name is Bob Wetzel. I'm the chairman of the Board of Trustees of the Upper Valley Land Trust, and we want to welcome you to kind of an afternoon and evening-long celebration of one of the most exciting things that we could possibly imagine, and that's celebrating 25 years of service from our extraordinary President Jeanie McIntyre. The entire intent of this afternoon and this evening is to focus on Jeanie, on her extraordinary service to the Upper Valley Land Trust, and we're going to kick it off this evening, or this afternoon, with a speaker who was personally chosen by Jeanie. When I went to Jeanie and talked to her about doing this event, first of all, she said, I really don't want to do it because I don't want to kind of focus on me. So, well, there's no choice. We are going to do it. So. And after we let her blush a little bit and continue to do that, I asked her who she would want to hear. And so the speaker you're going to hear from this afternoon was her very first choice. But before we get started, I'd like to make a few recognitions and thank yous. First of all, I want to thank Mascoma Bank and their representatives who are here for sponsoring this afternoon and our speaker. Thank you very much, Mascoma. I'd also like to thank King Arthur, who provided all of the cookies for our little reception outside, which were amazing. I had one of each, I think. The honorary committee for this event are all of our past chairmen, and they're all listed in the program. I won't acknowledge them all because they're not all here right now, but they'll be here a little bit later, so they'll get their time in the box a little bit later. But more importantly, I want to acknowledge our organizing committee, which includes Susan Renaud, who is here. Susan is in the back. There we go. Rick Rush, our immediate past chairman. Chris Nesbitt, who is here somewhere. Where's Chris? Right in the back in the middle. And Doug Wise, who will be arriving in just a few minutes. But more important than any of those are the people who really did all of the work. And that's our extraordinary projects director, Anna Slack, who is back over there. There we go. And our great administrative assistant, Lori Hood, who you met on your way in, handing out tickets and things like that. And we would like to also thank Dowd's Country Inn for their support. This is a great place that probably many of you have never been in and never realized actually existed. But because it's in Lyme, where Jeanie grew up and now lives, and we thought and Lyme is really one of the centers of land conservation in the Upper Valley, we thought it would be very appropriate to be here. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce our President, Jeanie McIntyre, to introduce our speaker.
Thank you. This is really humbling and really fun, and I really appreciate seeing all of you today. I guess I want to start by remembering this particular place from my childhood. This was a home, a private residence that belonged to a woman named Mary Bowden, who came to Lyme, I think maybe in the 50s or very early 60s as a widow with some young children and raised them here and made her home, made this her community, became a select woman and a civic leader in many ways. And really left an influence on Lyme that all of us who live here today are still feeling. And besides all of that, she was a person who taught me how to go uphill on skis. And I'm very grateful for that. Several years ago at a National Land Trust gathering, I heard Janisse Ray speak. And I felt immediately as though she were describing my home. The geography was different, but she knew the same ruralness, the people and the land, and the relationships and history between the people and the land, the things that I so dearly love about here. And she's a great storyteller, full of passion and compassion, urgent but not accusatory, sympathetic and unflinchingly honest, sharing hope, exploring accountability. I read her first book, Ecology of a Cracker Childhood, as I traveled home. And then I read Pinhook and the others, and I passed them on to friends. The most recent book, The Seed Underground, I read on vacation last month. Her writing is part memoir, part natural history. It's poetic, deeply observant, celebratory, an enthusiastic call to action. Janisse Ray is a gardener and a poet, a tender of farm animals, a seed saver, a naturalist, a hospice and Red Cross volunteer, a slow food cook, a beginning filmmaker. She's an award-winning author of 5 books of literary nonfiction and a collection of nature poetry. She's on the faculty of Chatham University's low residency MFA program and is a Woodrow Wilson Visiting Fellow. She holds an MFA from the University of Montana, and in 2007 was awarded an honorary doctorate from Unity College in Maine. She's been called the Southeast's Rachel Carson for our time. And as Bob said, when I was asked to suggest a writer or speaker to join in this special day, I thought immediately of Janisse Ray, because she so beautifully expresses the power and the far-reaching potential of knowing and acting and being local, and the biology of local. I was thrilled when she accepted our invitation. I'm just stunned that she's here with us. And I'm so pleased to introduce her, and please join me in welcoming her.
The sidewalk was crowded the evening the kingfisher fell. People stopped, staring at the ground, then up, bewildered. It just dropped from the sky, a woman said. Above, Chittenden Bank rose shining, 4 stories high. Windows are sky, dusky sky, the river meters away. Kingfisher. I know their chants by heart. I've watched hundreds dive, rise, fly off, but once I would hold a kingfisher in my hands. I would touch that blue power. It may be the only time I ever do. What I held was more precious than handfuls of money. If I could have thrown it to the wind, I would have. What to do with such wild pain was the question, and the answer, carry it across Elliott Street, to the bushes by the church, to the flowers, and set it down. Slip it inside an envelope of green. Give it back, all of it, and go home. Thank you all so much for having me. Thank you for being here this afternoon on this balmy January day. Upper Connecticut Valley, land of the Canada lynx and the dwarf wedge mussel, pink lady slipper and Indiana bat and common loon, White Mountain fritillary and bridal shiner. A place Agawam Indians once called home, and before that, the fishes of Hitchcock Lake. Thank you for inviting me to share this occasion. What a beautiful thing that we have gathered together to celebrate Jeanie McIntyre, who has labored hour by hour and day by day in service of the nature of this place and the quality of life here, of life itself, and who has bestowed her brilliance, her devotion, and her love upon wildness, green and open spaces, forests and marshes and mountains, the trails through them, the common and not so common flora and fauna alongside which we exist. This is to say that Jeanie, humble though she is, has devoted the last 25 years to us. In concert with you landowners, philanthropists, and visionaries, and with the help of her boards and staff and volunteers through the years, Jeanie McIntyre has left us an inheritance, a magnificent gift. Every one of us in this room is the recipient of her vision, her wisdom, her work. The word trust is important here. You put your trust in Jeanie McIntyre, and she did not let you down. But there's another meaning of the word trust, which is also a reason we're all here You are putting the natural wonders of New Hampshire and Vermont in safekeeping. And you're putting your personal financial resources into the safest, most long-term, highest payback, and lowest risk investment that we know. Your place, land, your community, each other, the future. This investment simply doesn't reward you. It rewards your neighbors. It rewards your grandchildren. And what better gift to leave in trust to humanity than an untrammeled, beautiful, iconic, storied property that slowly you connect with other properties, as you and Jeanie McIntyre have done, to form a net, a comforter across the Upper Valley, to form a legacy, an awe-inspiring legacy. You trust, you leave a trust in trust. The trust goes on, 25 years now, and it grows. There's a lot of bad news in the world, but when I looked through the newsletters that Jenny left in my room last night in the inn, I saw lots of pictures of people signing pieces of paper, and I knew what they were signing. And every picture of a person signing was a yell it to the rooftop, sing it at the top of your lungs announcement of unbelievably good news. I hope you didn't come tonight with a distaste for poetry, because I thought I'd include a few in the half hour I have with you, because poetry touches people someplace where nothing else can. And because Jeanie McIntyre and Robert Wetzel didn't bring me here all the way from South Georgia, a 46-acre farm in Tattnall County, where we still milk cows and goats, for me to smother you with facts. I can give you the facts that the land along the Connecticut River is the most fertile farmland there is, that the marshes, the wetlands are incredibly important to the cleanliness of the water, and on and on and on. Facts don't cause us to change, to act. No, a glowing ember deep within our hearts catches and bursts into flame. This poem is called 11th. I know where the ribbon snake lives, under the maple by the barn. One day when I was there, a dead leaf crackled like fire, and I saw her, a slip of green I followed around the waist of the tree, through already dying grass. When she turned to face me, eyes burning, she studied me. I, wanting to feel her softness, her certainty, the stove of her tiny heart, I touched one finger, only one, upon her perfect tail. At that moment, the tree opened, and she wound inside her passageway, dark and narrow. Long before I turned away, no doubt, she lay on her mat of earth at the bottom of the maple, among the roots, a strip of brilliant kindling. The 11th commandment is love the earth, love the tree, love the snake. We have incorrectly been taught 6 false beliefs: that we have unlimited resources, that we have a right, even an obligation to use those resources, that now is more important than any other point on the geologic timeline. Pleasure is the purpose of existence. Technology will save us, and that convenience and ease serve fine as our noble pursuits. Thus misguided, we have been forced to stand by and watch our landscapes and their communities disintegrate. Flying across our country, we look down and see this fragmented earth, its systems torn apart, the land divided and subdivided by roads, power lines, canals, railroad tracks, interstates, the earth paved. I've had to think about fragmentation because I come from a place where 99% of the native ecosystem is gone. 93 million acres of longleaf pine forest covered the southern uplands, from southern Virginia to East Texas, But by 1995, Reed Noss, a biologist with the National Biological Survey, looking at endangered ecosystems, found that 99% of naturally regenerated longleaf pines were gone, replaced by pine plantations, clear cuts, trailer parks, strip malls, church parking lots. This threw an entire suite of specially adapted plants and animals, the red-cockaded woodpecker, Bachman's sparrow, gopher tortoise, indigo snake, into decline. How can it be that humans have lived in the southeastern coastal plains for 12,000 years, and sandhill cranes for 60 million, and cranes have never built one supercenter or landfill or football stadium? They dance in the sphagnum bogs. Why haven't we figured out, with all this potential human evolution, how to live without so much fragmentation? The world is a globe of leaf-green continents amid 5 blue-green oceans, land we knife into smaller and smaller scraps. We have learned from island biogeography that fragmentation of the natural landscape affects the abundance and persistence of wild species. Fragmentation destroys their homes, their communities, and finally, them. What I've learned is that fragmentation of the native landscape is mirrored in human society. So that as we fragment the earth, we live among more and more marginalized individuals, broken families, dysfunctional communities, neighbors not knowing each other. Fragmentation is what happens when an argument breaks out at a family reunion. War is fragmentation between countries. Fragmentation leads to isolation. But the worst part is that it leads to annihilation. Fragmentation is the Iraqi man who lost 10 members of his family in the 2003 attack. In the Wire photograph, he is encircled by coffins, all of which hold members of his family, and he is moving from one to another. The photo shows him weeping over the coffin of his mother. For humans, isolation is the place of hopelessness, of depression, of despair. By deduction, then, we know real community, human or wild, to be a place of hope, of possibility, of wholeness. And what have you in this room, if not a community? I write about this in the book Pinhook, the story of how Pinhook Swamp has been rebuilt piece by piece until now. The Okefenokee Swamp of Georgia is connected ecologically to the Osceola National Forest, a wild land more than 750,000 acres in size, a land bridge over which our progeny may someday cross. O to O, Osceola to Okefenokee. For you, my friend, what does it mean that we have preserved a state of wildness straddling 2 states? Could it mean your life is enhanced, as are your children's? Could it mean your great-grandchildren may hear a red wolf calling or a panther cry? 2 great sounds denied me. Too much fragmentation and we lose wild species. Too much fragmentation and we lose ourselves. I want to interrupt here with a quick poem. I dated for a while an ornithologist, which my friends called a horny theologist. And one of the perks of that relationship was I got to go out bird banding with him in native ecosystems. And this is a poem called Bird Banding with the Biologist. Rufous-sided towhee, when I hold you, you're mine. And when I release, you pause unblinking before you take to wings that not one of us has. I love that. White-throated sparrow, Carolina wren, Must I capture you to know you? And how lucky we are this dawn to walk the mist net, a human spider web appearing and disappearing in the weak fog like milk poured down coffee. The sun yawns and stretches. Oh, cardinal, you take my breath as I draw you from the cotton bag, careful of your sharp beak. You're the color of spilled blood, an oak fire's embers. No human has feathers red enough for me. The man from Antarctica tells me of living in a tent in the ice with a year's supply of food, cans and cans, Shakespeare to read in the unbroken white silence. The penguins are there. The bottom of their colony, he says, is hotter than hell. It will disintegrate 10 cans. He comes back tied with bags, a bird hunter. We record their weight, sex, body fat. Give them their registry number on a tiny silver bracelet they wear around wishbone legs till death. And then for a moment, we see them for what they are. Birds in hand, creatures of the air, song boxes of spring mornings, migrating across landscapes of our design. And we praise them. O kinglet, O oriole, tell us what you know. Bird banding with the biologists. I'm often described as an activist, a political activist, an environmental activist, dirt-hugging, tree-hugging dirt worshiper. But I'm not a member of some movement or another. I'm not working on some issue or another. I'm an activist because I believe in life, in the possibility and redeeming hope of a good life. One set in community, in land, mythic in scope. I don't fight to prevent our administration from drilling for oil in the Arctic or keep the last unroaded areas of our national forests unroaded or halt climatic disruption. Those are issues. I say that I am working to help remake a world in which we can be fully human. To remake a world in which our children can be fully human, which is our birthright, after all. So you have to ask yourselves, in a quite philosophical way, what does it mean to me that I have been given this human form for this brief time on this beautiful planet? To me, it's going to be different for all of us. I think to be fully human means to be engaged in our places, in the biota there, the cycles of seasons, of moons, of weather, of tides, to all the things that connect us to the 10,000 generations that were here before there were smartphones or Blackberries or iPods. I think it means to participate in and at least understand the necessities of human survival, the production and acquisition of shelter, food, water, warmth, so that we understand that for every minute of every hour of every day, we are biological creatures absolutely dependent on the processes of the earth for survival. And in these lands you have saved are the storehouses, the factories for the processes of life we all need to survive. I think to be fully human is to be engaged with each other, our partners, offspring, families, communities, neighbors, clans, that nothing stands between your heart and mine, not your race, your nationality, your sexual orientation, your religion, so that the death of an Afghani man pains us as much as the death of our own cousin. And 4, to recognize that we are spiritual beings, moored by spirit, and I'm not a churchgoer here, moored by spirit, and connected to each other and all living things by it. I believe that as we strive to industrialize and civilize and sanitize and technologize our lives, we lose these essential things. Our most vital challenge in the 21st century is figuring out individually and collectively how to lead whole lives. Whole. Simple, honorable, sustainable. Sustainable meaning able to meet our needs without sacrificing the abilities of future generations to meet their needs. How are we going to lead whole lives? How do we put our lives back together? How do we live well despite the fragmentation and destruction? And in some cases, how do we even live? Which are the questions that the polar bear and the Atlantic salmon and the bald eagles and the right whales are asking. These are questions you have to ponder today, tonight, when you return home. What does wholeness mean to me? What would that look like? What can I do to make my life more whole? Take the word estranged from our personal dictionaries. Rejoin ourselves to others. Save large tracts of land to wildness. Restore that land to wildness. Return ourselves to the land. When I was a young woman just beginning to write, I began a study of oppression. I was lucky enough to fall in the whereabouts of people who worked for world change. These were the words they used, world change. People who were members of Peace Coalition, who quit shaving their legs, drummed with other men in circles on full moons, marched for civil rights, came out of closets. So in a time when I was struggling to find my voice as a writer, I was struggling to find my voice as a human living in the 20th century in the United States of America, a country founded on the ideals of freedom and democratic rights, but built ironically and tragically on subjugation. I was raised to be godly and quiet, good and good-looking, a Southern girl in a subset of uneducated, dirty fingernail, whip you if you don't sit there and act right, working-class people. That I fell in with radicals makes sense, but I have been a shock to my people. My love of nature funneled me toward a life of activism. How could I not defend the wild places where I learned so much and found such hope and comfort? I became an environmentalist because I could not stand idly by and watch the destruction of nature. If silence was consent, I would not be silent. The more I learned, the more I comprehended that environmental destruction is intrinsically connected to every brand of oppression on the planet, one of many forms of violence against this glorious experiment called life. Every brand of social domination parallels the exploitation of nature. I learned that the only true opposition to domination is the refusal to participate, which means reimagining and recreating a life with equality and wholeness at its axis and attempting to live that life. I came to understand that what I stood to lose by being quiet and complacent was greater than what I stood to lose by action. Once in Alaska, a friend took us in his little boat to St. Lazaria, where the Muirs nest. On the back side of the island was a huge cavern, and on ledges of rock cliffs around it, hundreds of penguin-like birds stood. We cut the engine, but even hundreds of yards away, we spooked the birds, and they came pouring from a cavern. Thousands of wings resounded off the cliffs as they took flight. There was no jostling, no panic. I don't think any two of them ever touched wingtips. Each leaped off into space and flew out to sea in formation. They flew as quickly back, circling into the cave mouth. They reminded me of an audience I heard in a darkened concert hall in Sitka singing Amazing Grace as one. How much life, how many hearts, altogether oceans of blood and others of sap, continents of bones. I love this world. In almost every audience, someone asks me how I stay hopeful these days, if I stay hopeful. How do I find hope? Do I have hope? And I thought, hope? Who needs hope to keep going? Do you feed your child because you have hope she'll turn out okay? You find out she has asthma, so you quit? What about love? What about love as motivation? So the question, How do you stay hopeful should be, how do you stay love-filled? How? I wake every morning and listen to the wrens and the great crested flycatchers, and I watch that fat old orange sun, always full, rising over the pasture. It's not hope that keeps me going. It's fight, which I'll define as life force. I may not have a lot of hope, but I have plenty of love, and I have plenty of fight. The last thing I want to do today is read you a very short piece that's more pertinent to your area. I lived in Brattleboro for 4 years, and this is about a page-long piece about going to an old spring. Because there was no snow on the ground, and because deep in the woods beautiful things can still be found, one winter day, Stuart and Beverly Thurber took my husband and me to see an old spring in the woods above their Vermont farm. Now the day was sunny and warmer than usual for December, and hiking to the old spring was a perfect way to spend an afternoon. Besides, we would get to see more of the farm. Past the sugar house, we crossed a pasture, then climbed through the sugar bush to a high ridge. From there, walking along an old road long forgotten by travelers. As we walked, we chatted. Would the town's water treatment system be able to handle the whey from the new cheese plant? Would we ever get snow? Would it be a good year for sugaring? When would the new milk house be finished? I'm going to skip a little section here and just say this, that the Thurbers, I don't know if y'all know of Lilac Ridge Farm, they transitioned from chemical agriculture to organic, and Ross Thurber, the son, came back home and talked his father into doing this. When we lived in Brattleboro, it was one of the absolute joys of my life to ride out to the Thurber farm and lift the lid of this big tank and dip out this cream-covered, beautiful milk. We climbed a while, turned along a crest, climbed more. Finally, at a certain place deep in the forest, without hesitation, Stu left the abandoned roadbed, and we descended through old trees. "We're not far now," he said. Then we came within sight of a small structure built of stone. Here was the spring house, round gray river stones so old and moss-covered that the little building seemed elemental, native. Nothing Stu could have said would have described the magic of it, the fit-togetherness of it, the flawlessness. The spring house spoke of the vernacular of the Vermont hills, rich country between the Green Mountains and the Connecticut River. Its mason had been a true artist with a superb eye for fitting stones and for using outrageously shaped or colored rocks to their best advantage. Even the roof was stone. A triangle of white quartz served as gable, and a strange long arm of granite rose from the peak of the roof, pointing like a compass to the sky. Inside, a pool had been formed of concrete, and the water filling it was clear and clean. The shelf around the little pool, Stu said, had been used for keeping butter and such. A length of metal pipe served as overflow, from which water fell across mossy and leafy rocks into its tumble of weak stream bed. "How old is it?" I asked, because it seemed ancient, druidic. And Stu said he thought the 30s. Townspeople had a cabin nearby that they used as a camp, summers, so they could escape Brattleboro on weekends. The spring house had belonged to them. A fence that had at one time kept livestock out of the water was long down and rotted into the ground. Only 2 massive stone gate posts remained, and between them, miraculously, the gate itself, which was made like an X inside a square. "That has to be chestnut," Stu said, "or it would be gone too." The 4 of us sat down on the rocks outside the little house. We sat on the rocks for a long time, watching the spring bubble, feeling its chill on our faces. The water ran and ran. It kept running. It had been running when we walked up to it, and it would be running when we walked away. It had been running since the 30s, since before Stu was born, since the glaciers receded. It required no electricity, no valves, no faucets, no seals. From out of the soul of the earth, it never stopped coming. Finally, I reached down and drank. I got to thinking, sitting there on the rocks, how foreign is that act to most of us. Most of us will never come upon an old spring that is flowing with pure water, and to get to reach down and cup our mouths to it. Every spring that I remember from my Georgia childhood is gone, the water table drawn down by industrial deep wells. I recall one sulfurous artesian spring between my house and the coast at Brunswick, and I have no recollection of the year the pipe went dry. When the nuclear plant came to my county, more springs disappeared. Some of those my grandparents remember, I never saw. We sat a long while on rocks around the door of the spring, listening to the water gurgle and warble, imagining bottles of milk and bowls of eggs sitting on its ledge, children running down with pails. We talk about trees and about history. I wished I had a jug so I could take some ancient water home, but all I had for a vessel was my stomach, so I filled that before we hiked back down the hill and along the ridge and through the sugar bush and across the pasture, where beautiful cows grazed beautiful hills, tended by beautiful people, below a secret spring deep in the woods that never turns off and never stops singing. Are we preparing ourselves for the world ahead? Are we preparing the world? That's where you come in, you visionaries, you thinkers, you of generosity, of service, you who do so much good. Someone questioned Gandhi once, saying, "Our problems are big. We need big solutions," to which Gandhi replied, big problems need small solutions. Big problems need protection of land on whatever the scale that will be a storehouse for the continuation of the natural processes on which we all survive. We are desperate for thinkers, not consumers. We are desperate for people of courage, for risk takers. We are hungry for true greatness. We need people who will take responsibility for their own actions. We need people willing to live in service to something bigger than their own desires. The writer Bill Kittredge said, "We all lose much of what could have been ours because we don't pay good attention while we invent the future. But today is a day for all of us to consider the rest of our lives and the rest of life. You are the ones paying attention. You are the ones who, through good thinking, can invent a different America, a different New England, a different Vermont, and a New Hampshire. It seems fitting, doesn't it, that creatures of privilege, us, gifted beings, able to use languages, to pass messages across geographies and generations, should speak and act on behalf of those who cannot. Although the tasks before us seem monumental, as are the griefs we have known, we must find hope in a vision and hang on to it relentlessly, because life is unendingly fascinating, unbearably beautiful, and utterly fragile. In my dream, the poet Brian Andreas said, "In my dream, the angel shrugged, and she said, 'If we fail this time, it will be a failure of the imagination.' And then she placed the world gently in the palm of my hand. Here's the world. If we fail this time, thank you for doing the good work of envisioning our planet more livable, sustainable, simple, for paying for that vision, for passing the vision on, for asking the rest of the world to wake up for it. Thank you, Robert, for inviting me to come. Thank you, Jeanie. Thank you, Jeanie McIntyre, for giving 25 selfless years of your one precious life. to the thing that's going to last beyond any of our lifetimes, which is the place itself. The land remembers your name, Jenny. I want to end with one last poem. One is one little thing. Edith Forbes said in this little book that Jenny gave me, Why We Conserve Land, Edith Forbes, there's something to be said for going to the same place again and again until it is no longer just a beautiful snapshot, admired by a life passing through, until I know it as a living thing that moves through time, just as I do. And then I want to end with just one more poem about the Upper Valley in my years here. 600 gallons of fresh milk. A month after Hurricane Katrina tore through New Orleans, 2 days after the most intense earthquake ever hit Pakistan, the day after Vermont flooded in New Hampshire, after we worked hours sweeping and sopping water from our own ruined basement and had slept poorly briefly that morning, although roads were bad, bridges washed out, with the sky still drizzling and more rain predicted to fall, I went for milk. Fields were thick with vines, farm stands ripe with pumpkins. At the dairy barn, swallows flew from the hayloft into first sun. A few cows had not been taken from their stanchions, and bags full they watched me arrive with my jars into the milk house through the door with the missing screen. I lifted the lid of the tank. It was full, almost overflowing, a white nourishment, sweet-smelling, entirely beyond tragedy, and floating with cream. I stared and stared. Oh, the relief of it, the beauty. Think what our lives will look like when we get them back. Thank you. Questions, you can ask me anything. If you're brave enough to ask it, I'll try to answer. And I don't have all the answers about what are we going to do about climate change. And don't ask me about that. Yes.
I've got a philosophical question.
Uh-oh.
You talked about not having hope but love and fight. Can you talk about where that comes from?
Because what I hear in people's questions, you know, do you have hope? Where do you have hope? Is this sentence, which is, I am hopeless, and the hopeless implies inaction. And so I think that we all need to get to the place beyond hope. I don't think hopelessness implies inaction. So you have so in that thinking you have to figure out, well then why do we act? We act because we love. We act when we love, whether the turnout is going to be positive or not. There's something burning inside of us, some force of life that wants life to flourish, the life of ourselves, our communities, wild communities, and that thing burns on. Really? Really what I'm saying here is something about hope, that we're in a pretty bad situation. We all know it. I don't need to tell you guys any facts. You're better read than I am. You can get the New York Times up here, and I can't. I'm just asking you, don't stop doing what you do because you think there's going to be a really bad ending, because there may not be. You really wanted to hear something more hopeful than that, didn't you? Yeah, it's right there.
Can you describe a couple of places from your childhood memory that still linger and have had the greatest influence on sort of who you are and what you've become and what you've written about?
So this completely ties in with why we're all here tonight and what you all do, and that is, I live along a river called the Altamaha. It drains a quarter of the state of Georgia. It's the third largest watershed flowing from the Atlantic seaboard. Along the Altamaha, when I was a child, 3 elderly people owned a piece of land that was about 3,200 acres. And one by one, they began to die. Somewhere, somebody with the Nature Conservancy saw that it was a really ecologically rich piece of land. It hadn't been. They had decided to preserve their land as a monument. Somebody in their family, it was their uncle actually. Did you do that? Somebody's doing it. I like it.
It's the ghost in the machine.
Yeah. So, but when I became an adult, I began to work to save this place, and we actually did. It went to auction, and 7 timber companies bid against the Nature Conservancy. The Nature Conservancy's bid was opened last. And I also wanted, I also wanted to mention that, you know, we talk about how much land the Upper Valley Land Trust has saved, how many acres, but there's also, behind all this joy of what has been saved, in Jeannie and the staff and in others lies the grief of the places that we lost. And in me too, I've lost a lot of places. In this case, this one was saved. We hiked New Year's Day there. It's a tradition that we go on a wild hike. And there are 1,000-year-old cypress. There's an old-growth virgin longleaf forest. It took $8.1 million to buy it, and it was the best $8.1 million that we ever had to raise. Thanks for asking that question.
Kathy?
What would you say or do to motivate children and young adults to get involved and think for their future? They say, we don't have time, we don't have money, but what does it take to get them going?
So when you say young, do you mean small children or college?
Both.
So with small children is easy, and that's, you know, Last Child in the Woods. Read that book and look at nature deficit disorder and take all their little gadgets away from them and make them go out in the woods and find safe places for them to be in the woods. And then for older children, I don't know, I'm involved. My son spent the night, my son just graduated from UMass, and he's living in Brattleboro. And he spent the night with me last night here, and we had breakfast, and he was with me part of the morning. And this is a question that, you know, young people have it harder than we do. They're facing a lot of peaks. Peak prosperity, peak oil, peak soil, peak water. They've got a lot to process. And so I think inviting them, you know, paying for them, inviting young people to come here tonight and say, this is my gift to you. I want to pay for you to come to this. You know, pay for them to go to the next thing. They may not have the money you do. My son doesn't. He wants it, though. Anybody else? Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about the differences and similarities between where you live in Georgia and this area?
They're very, very different, honestly. And so you have a lot of deciduous forests, and our major tree in the uplands is pine. And so let's see what else I could tell you about that. Our deciduous forests are lowland forests. There's actually more similarity. I lived in Montana for a while, and there's more similarity with the ponderosa pines of Montana, you know, those vanilla smelling pines. And also even with the redwood trees of California than with the Northeast. We also can see birds more easily. Here, when I bird in the woods here, the birds are always about 150 feet high and the wind is blowing. You're like, wait, you actually think that that is a cerulean warbler up there? They come down farther in the south.
Because
we don't have as high a trees, maybe. I don't know. I'm being a little facetious. I wish I had a better answer for you. You have more mountains than we do. You have stones and we don't. We don't have any stones in our soil. Some tiny, tiny red pebbles that are ferrous oxide, whereas you have lots of geology and we have lots of biology.
We'll send you some stones.
Well, I'll send you some trash.
That's not a good trade.
Okay, I'll send you some alligators.
Well, that might be worth it.
One time I did a talk. I see that hand. One time I did a talk, and my husband was rushed out to the bathroom afterwards, and this other man obviously had to go pretty badly, and he rushed too. And he didn't know that the man in the stall next to him was my husband, and he said, "When will speakers learn that the brain can only absorb what the butt can tolerate?"
One or two. Did I see one over here? Please.
I was really touched when we were talking about the gift of the Upper Valley Land Trust and giving us the opportunity to invest locally in the land that is an investment that is made without risk. And you went on and said more about that. And it just makes my heart sing to hear people talk about putting their money into the future of the planet. And
What do you mean it makes your heart sing?
well, because it's so difficult for me to see majority of people I know, my own family, my own personal wealth, having come from industries that have succeeded financially at the expense. I mean, we're not living so that other people might live, as my experience. And I think coming to these things are wonderful, but until we're able to look at our need to preserve the planet as being a priority, to make more money so that we can be sure our kids go to college, or that we have a retirement plan, with the knowledge that our kids go to college, but we're at war for water and for air and for food, that it's not going to make any difference whether they have an education or not. And I'm just looking at the big picture. I was reading about Chris Hedges this morning, who talks about this.
Well, you actually named the real problem there, and it's a tough one to look at. I will say this, that I almost never go do a talk. I cut it out today because I thought that Robert would kill me if I talked about it, but I always talk about capitalism. You know, my neighbor, who's an environmental lobbyist in Georgia, top lobbyist, he said, you know, we can envision the end of the world quicker than we can envision the end of capitalism. Now, capitalism is not inherently bad, but the way that we are practicing capitalism, which is with a model of grow, grow, grow endlessly. So there, you know, the model of uphill growth, you know, this is the model of industrial capitalism right now as we practice it. But Herman Daly, who is an economist at the University of Maryland, he suggests a steady state economy. So I will say this, we do need educations. You know, we can't do without that. But I think you're right that we're going to have to reinvent our lives, and it's very likely we're going to be forced to reinvent our lives, where we really look at prosperity and where it comes from, how we get it, and yeah, I think we'll be forced to re-examine. I mean, peak prosperity is a term that Chris Hedges and others are bandying about right now, but there's, I think, a lot of truth in it, that we may have seen the crest, and we have to redefine what prosperity is going to mean. There's a wonderful man who lives in my community who's from the Hudson Valley originally, and he's an amateur economist who we have these conferences on sustainability, and he always gives a talk in local economics. He lists the things that we should be investing in. And he says, invest in your health, invest in practical skills, invest in farmland. You know, invest in a farm where you can get food if you need to get food. Invest in gold and silver. Invest in tools. Invest in alcohol. And the reason he says that is if you need to trade something, everybody's going to want some alcohol. So I'm fascinated with money. I mean, it doesn't make sense that I, who am a nature writer and a nature activist, would be so fascinated, but I am, and how money has created this big hole that we've all gotten in. And so then what do we do with our money, and what do we do to get out of the hole? And I think this idea of investing in land and community is the answer. When you shop locally, you're investing in your local community. And shopping locally means trying to have $1 circulate as many times as possible. It means we give $1 to Dowd's Country Inn. Dowd buys its eggs from the farmer down the road. You know, it gets its flour from King Arthur, who gets the wheat from Butterworks Farm, and on and on and